This is All of It. I'm Alison Stewart, live from the WNYC studios in Soho. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. I'm really grateful you are here. Let's take a listen to some Bob Dylan.
Once upon a time you dressed so fine, threw the bumps of dime in your prime.
In the new film, A Complete Unknown, we get a glimpse of the enigma of Bob Dylan through the musicians and the love interest who entered his orbit in the early 60s up until the moment he went electric. The film begins in 1961 as Dylan makes his way to New York. He meets his ailing idol, Woody Guthrie, and soon encounters folk musician Pete Seeger, played by my next guest, Edward Norton, in a performance that was nominated for a Critics' Choice and a Golden Globe Award. We see Dylan develop into a person who absorbs those around him, from the earnest singers like Seeger to the more id-like Johnny Cash. And it's an interesting watch for New Yorkers. We get to see the city during a moment in time. Some of you listening may recall that time. And a lot of the action takes place 5 minutes from our studios. A Complete Unknown was written and directed by James Mangold. It is nominated for a Critics' Choice Award for Best Picture. You can see it in New York this weekend. It opens nationwide on Christmas. I'm really glad to speak with Ed Norton. Hi, Ed. Edward.
Thanks. Yeah, good to be here.
Which do you prefer, Ed or Edward?
My dad's Ed, and he might be listening, so probably he's here in the village. We're all in the village today.
What was challenging or rewarding for you in playing Pete Seeger in particular?
Well, I moved to the village in 1991 when I was 21 years old. I honestly song to Woody. Dylan's first original song on his first record was part of the soundtrack of my own personal kind of mythology, moving to New York and thinking about the actors and musicians I loved and wanting to step into their footsteps. And Pete Seeger, if you came up as an artist in New York, Pete Seeger's one of the Olympians. Mm-hmm. He and not necessarily because you have to be a folk fan. He just was known as one of the artists who made a difference. He was one of the artists he was the paragon of the artist.
10th Avenue between 24th.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Brooke calling for Sydney.
We've got, hold on one second. We've got different lines going. Okay, Ed, let's see if your line is working. Are you there, Edward?
Yeah, so we're all set.
Okay, perfect.
You know what? We're going to ask everybody to hold on for a minute because all of our Zooms are going at once. Let's see if we've got this in the control room. We're all set? All right, let's restart. I'm talking to Edward Norton about A Complete Unknown. I think it's just us on the line. Can you hear me, Edward?
Yes, indeed.
All right, it sounds good. You were talking about how important Pete Seeger was to anyone who was an artist who came to live in the village.
Yeah, Pete Seeger was the folk singer who helped clean up the Hudson River. He was the singer who answered Martin Luther King's postcards and went to the South to play in the civil rights marches in 1958, and was on the Selma March and wrote We Shall Overcome. And it just, he was at the absolute apogee of artist as activist, artist as humanitarian, artist as environmentalist. And if you were even glancingly interested in those issues and the idea of artists as citizens, he really is he's like Gandalf, and so I had a lot of admiration for him. And because I am interested in music and play guitar and stuff, you knew Pete Seeger also was this formidable virtuoso banjo and guitar player, and kind of one of the greats. And I grew up with my mom's Peter, Paul and Mary records, and you would see that Pete Seeger wrote Where Have All the Flowers Gone and If I Had a Hammer and all these things. So I knew a lot about him. And I knew maybe even more about Dylan, but in some ways I'd say it was in some ways I say it put a burden on the idea of doing a film about them, because I held them in such a mythological status. Sometimes you almost feel it's heretical to try to like represent these people,
Hmm.
because they're so iconic, so musically virtuoso, and Jim Mangold, who is a wonderful director, he was really articulate in talking about why he wanted to look at this brief period where these people were colliding with each other: young Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, the veteran, Joan Baez, the kind of princess of folk at the time, and how this emergent moment that was taking place largely in Greenwich Village produced this cultural flowering, this phenomenal moment of emergent talent that Dylan was in many ways the pinnacle of, that ended up not just being kind of the punk rock outsider cultural, kind of form, but really playing a really substantial role in the political expression of a whole generation that wanted progressive change. And I think Jim's interest was anthropological, and he was interested in the ways that these people were allies, competitors, lovers, got into arguments, and the way those fertile interactions produced this thing. And Dylan obviously is, he's a global sort of cultural and literary icon almost, but I think Jim wanted to look at, the idea of almost the innocent and aspirational kind of characteristic of that time.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because Pete Seeger in the film is a traditionalist in the good sense of the word, and he's really appealing to Dylan's songwriting, sort of his greater angels. And then you have Johnny Cash, who's sort of more id-like and pulling at Bob Dylan. What is it that Seeger wants for Dylan and for his talent?
I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure I even want to impose it. I'm going to say this, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but one of the things that I think Dylan gave artists, apart from the songs themselves, is he gave us almost the impossible standard of the artist who defends the right of the audience to come to their own interpretation of meaning. When people would say, "What do the songs mean?" He would say, "I wrote them. I don't know what they mean. You tell me what they mean." He refused to unpack it before, he was the magician, and he wasn't going to show you the trick, right? Because he knew that the power of the trick that he was doing was to create feeling in you, and let you see yourself in what he was writing, or see your generation in what he was writing. And I think, and in some ways, the film, in answer to your question, I think there's a lot of ways you can interpret the relationships between a Pete Seeger and a Bob Dylan, and a Joan Baez and a Bob Dylan, and they were paradoxical and multidimensional. I think that's what I love about what Jim's done, is he doesn't take a side per se, or cast a value judgment on one type of integrity versus another type of integrity. And Seeger's integrity was legendary. The type of integrity Dylan had, as an artist who follows his own line, is something that's also admirable for different reasons. And they weren't the same, and they were allies, and then they kind of parted ways. But I think letting the audience kind of feel what they align with and what they relate to, and is a big part of why we're doing it. So I have some of my own thoughts about it, but I think part of the beauty of it is the paradoxes and the things that, because people can be allies and still get into arguments, and people can be lovers and still be competitors, and that's what I think makes it rich and juicy and human and relatable, even if you're not a folk singer, right?
Pete Seeger, of course, a longtime New Yorker, and he appeared on WNYC a number of times. We found an appearance from 1941.
Oh, wow.
In which he talked about his banjo playing. Let's listen.
That 5-string banjo you heard was played by Pete Seeger. Pete's been a member of the American Square Dance group for some time. He'd just come back from a trip down the south. He's brought back with him some swell folk tunes. Say, Pete, you don't see many 5-string banjos today, do you?
Why, no, you don't. You see, the banjo is one of the few really Native American instruments. The five-string banjo's the kind they used to play in the old minstrel shows 75 years ago. And I've heard tell that it was developed by Negro slaves who were brought over from Africa. And when the old minstrel shows died out, the five-string banjos became less and less common. So now they're found mostly down in secluded sections of the South.
What do you say, Pete? Play us one of the tunes you picked up on your trip.
Okay. Here's one called John Hardy.
And that's Pete Seeger. You can, of course, talk to Rhiannon Giddens about banjos. That's an amazing African-American instrument. When you were playing, it was you playing the banjo. Is that true, Edward?
Yeah, I mean, I have a grounding in guitar and was able to, to work with some phenomenal professional banjo players. Although I will say there's something really interesting, which is Pete Seeger played he was a virtuoso. He could play Beethoven's Ode to Joy on the banjo and play bluegrass and play just about everything. But he played often in this style called clawhammer, and it's not as popular today. And it's hard to find people. There were some brilliant banjo players who can't totally work out sometimes some of the things he was playing. But because I had a background in guitar, I was able to put a lot of focus onto a very few of his things, and it was hard. Banjo is really difficult. I find it difficult, and there are aspects of I don't want to say all of our techniques and trickery, but yes, we played our songs live. I mean, we all felt that there is such a different quality to your voice when you're singing in a large space for a real audience, and so we wanted to capture the core of the performances live, and it was the right thing to do. The thing I learned, we all learned, and Timothy is brilliant in his musical renderings of Dylan's songs. But you just realize Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, they were people who played unadorned, and they make it look easy. They make it look simple. And when you try to recreate what they do, you really realize the depth of their talent, the depth of their vocal control, their breath control, the sophistication of what they're playing. It was kind of wondrous for all of us. And I think, but I don't think you'll find a movie this year with more music in it. It's got a lot of really great music in it. Not like being a musical, but more because these people were living in music. They were expressing themselves through music.
What do you appreciate about this kind of story? The way this movie is among the many music films that you'll get to see. May not as much music as yours, but this one has quite a bit.
I think, as I was saying, it's really not a biopic. This doesn't move through a life in a color, but it really is an immersion in this very intense moment of creative collision between people in the village, and really looks at the way a complete unknown, this very young person, arrived in this city, and in the span of less than 4 years, he made himself into his talent, propelled himself into this incredible place in the culture, and yet he needed to move on from that even, and Jim has said, and I really like his articulation of this, that, Dylan kind of came from nowhere because he was restless and he wanted to get somewhere, and he got there and he did things, and then he got restless again and then kept moving, and I think I love the way that the film looks at a very short window in which a lot happened, and then it dissipated in some sense, and because I think it has a lot to say about youth, and about the way that we will ourselves into being who we want to be, and I think it has something to say about the ebbs and flows in American life of the way art and politics and culture will kind of come together, and then maybe now we're in a period where they're not so closely, interactive, and it's worth meditating, I think, on how closely intertwined the societal change and the art were at that time. It's a beautiful depiction of that time, I think.
When you think about living in New York in the early 60s, what part of it would you have really liked? What would you have liked living in Greenwich Village in the 60s?
I think you have this feeling that there was still a kind of a radical anti-commercialism, right? They're just people. There's a great line in one documentary I saw. Bobby Newworth, the musician and painter, who was friends with Dylan. He says back then, nobody said how many records have you sold. They said, have you got anything to say? And you get this feeling that there was an intense interest in the authenticity of the work as opposed to its commercial value. And I think we're in this period in American life where I feel like the addiction to maximization of just about everything is expressing itself. Where we're in real danger, I think, of art being completely subsumed by the idea of content and its collateral value. And I think it seems like there was a really interesting gravitational pull in the Village of artists of all different stripes who were here to really kind of be at the center of a serious conversation, and that sounds appealing to me. But it's funny. I mean, honestly, this is a New York station, and it's a good New York detail. But I used to, when I was 22 and doing plays on East 4th Street, or I would go see Downtown Theater, see the Worcester Group or whatever. I remember seeing Willem Dafoe in the Worcester Group, who I later got to work with, and I would wander up to MacDougal Street, and there was a place that's still there called La Lanterna di Vittorio, just below Washington Square Park on MacDougal on the west side of the street. And that was like my go-to place for taking a date after a play and having a beer and a piece of pie or whatever. And I found out in the course of making this movie that was Pete Seeger's house. That was where Pete Seeger lived with his wife Toshi when they were first married, probably right after that interview you just played. It was her parents' house. Her father was a Japanese man who did scenic design for the Provincetown Playhouse, which was right next door. And they lived on the first floor, which is where the restaurant is. And I had this like, flooding realization that for years when I was in my early 20s, I used to sit in the evening by the fireplace in what had been Pete Seeger's bedroom, which is amazing. And it's still there. You can go to that restaurant today. And if you go, you're in Pete Seeger and Toshi Seeger's old in-laws house before they moved up to Beacon, where they famously lived. And it's like, that's the great thing about Greenwich Village. And I mean, I'm looking out across it now, and it's sort of like, we're losing some things here and there, but there's such an incredible, like when you're walking around in the Village, you're passing the ghosts of so many amazing people. And I think it's what I still love about living here.
I can't wait to walk past there on the way home. What exciting. My guest has been Edward Norton. The movie is called A Complete Unknown. He plays Pete Seeger in the movie. Edward, it was really a pleasure talking to you. Come by the studio. We'll have a conversation about art, whatever.
Absolutely. I need you to send me that clip of Pete. I've heard many, many, many things, and I had never heard that one, and it's great. I love hearing his voice in every phase of his life. And, he was a remarkable New Yorker, and I think I really hope. Timothy and I talked about, like, why do you do something like this? And I think you realize that even if you're a fan, you realize there are many, many people who have lost a direct connection to Pete Seeger's music, to Bob Dylan's music even. And if more people return to connection with it because the film evokes the romance of that time, I think we'll feel really happy. I think it took us deeper back into it, and hopefully it's an access point for others to get connected to that period and those artists.
Thanks for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.